Good morning and welcome to the African Philanthropy Forum's East Africa Regional Meeting. My name is Saran Kaba-Jones and it is my privilege to be the moderator for what I hope will be an engaging and insightful discussion on exploring strategic partnerships for social impact in Africa. I'm particularly excited about this panel because I work in the social impact space myself. And there is no question that addressing critical development issues in Africa requires cross-sector collaborations. And strategic partnerships play a pivotal role in producing high-impact and sustainable solutions on the continent. Over the years, philanthropists, government, businesses, nonprofit organizations, and other stakeholders in Africa have used their resources and expertise to address critical problems within their communities and countries. However, given the scale and magnitude of Africa's complex social issues, there is a need for all parties to pool resources across sectors to not only solve issues, but scale high-impact initiatives as partners with a shared responsibility to foster sustainable development in Africa. Although collaboration is a well-known concept, our discussion today will go beyond this and place special focus on strategic and innovative ways key stakeholders can cultivate lasting and effective partnerships in the pursuit of an inclusive society for all to thrive. Join me in welcoming our panelists. So Rita, can we start with you, please, if you don't mind just giving us a brief introduction, introducing yourself and your work at the Mastercard Foundation.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank the APF for inviting the Mastercard Foundation. We were early incubator, organization who helped incubate APF, and it's wonderful to see how it's evolved. The Mastercard Foundation is a Canadian foundation based in Toronto. We're a young foundation. We were founded about 2006 by the Mastercard company at the time of its IPO. But our governance and our management, our board of directors, our team is completely separate from the company. We have a significant asset base, and early on we made a decision to work and focus in Africa. So today we are in over 30 countries across the continent, cumulative investment or commitment of over $2 billion. I would say that the impact to date is close to 25 million people through a range of programs collectively. We would not be here today at this point without collaboration, and collaboration with many different organizations and consortia of organizations. We recently announced in Kigali a month ago a new Pan-African strategy that will focus on young people, specifically youth employment and the future of work in Africa. And we have set a goal of enabling 30 million young people, especially young women, to access dignified and fulfilling work. And again, this is work that cannot be undertaken alone by any one organization. And our intent will be to build on all the lessons learned over our first decade of work, lessons much conveyed and bestowed by our partnerships and our experiences, but to then work very closely with government, with the private sector, with educators, most importantly with young people themselves, but certainly with a community of philanthropists and other kinds of funders who are interested in being engaged. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Dr. Mbaiwa.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for inviting me and for allowing me to be part of this panel. I'm Dr. Kenyatta Mbaiwa with Highlight Foundation. We are based in Harare, Zimbabwe. The foundation has been actually up and running since 1996. And to date, we have impacted more than 250,000 students, assisting them with scholarships. Our work is headquartered in Harare, but we have offices in Lesotho, South Africa, Burundi. We work quite closely with Rwanda, with Imbuto Foundation, and we're in the process of opening an office in Kenya as well. And our work is mostly focused on education. And I would like to acknowledge the presence of people like Eddie Mandri from Yale, one of our partners. There's Heather also in this meeting. She's with End Fund. I'm sure I'll have opportunities to also expand on how those partnerships are actually helping us in the education space. I didn't mention that we have impacted more than 250,000 students to date. As of about 2015, we decided to take a bolder step, and the foundation has decided that we want to raise leaders across Africa, and the number we have put up is 2 million by 2020. I think I'll have a chance to expand on that later on.
Thank you. Ms. Kenyatta.
Good morning. I'm Yokabi Kenyatta. I'm happy to be here, and thank you, the APF, for inviting myself on behalf of the Kenyatta Trust to be with you this morning. Our work at the Kenyatta Trust, we say we transform lives through education, one family at a time. We focus on educating children from high school, and we walk with them through to university, but we go beyond education because we feel education really without character is nothing. So we also have programs, strong mentorship programs, counseling that we do, internships that we also put our children through. We also work with the families that the children, our beneficiaries, come from. They're mainly single women, they're guardians. We assist them with economic empowerment programs through providing microfinance and working with them as well to build capacity. There are a lot of different programs that we have for the children, and we work with various organizations so to make that happen. But I guess that's what we're discussing. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we can jump right in. And Rita, I'd like to start with you. In a talk you gave in 2015 called The Problem with Philanthropy, you suggested 5 things that philanthropists can do to overcome the paradox in philanthropy. You talked about listening, engaging, elevating the voices of the poor, evaluating and measuring impact, and lastly, collaboration. You mentioned that collaboration is a core value at the Mastercard Foundation, but it's not a core competency within philanthropy. Could you share some success stories and failures about the strategies for cultivating strategic social partnerships for change at the foundation?
Sure, thank you very much. First of all, I'll say, as we all know, philanthropy is a human endeavor, and inevitably it is, it's an ongoing process. We have moments of milestones which we celebrate, but there are also flaws and occasions when we have to take stock. I'd point to one example. We have a very significant commitment, like my colleagues here, to education. And we created some years ago the Mastercard Foundation Scholars Program. This is a global initiative, but exclusively focused on the continent. It focuses on enabling young people at the high school level, as well as in tertiary education, access high quality education. But there's a significant component around leadership, ethical leadership, and transformative leadership. So that is sort of the big picture. So it's all about bringing together and nurturing the next generation of leaders here on this continent. The process required bringing together a number of players over a period of time. So today we have 27 partners around this collaborative adventure. They're universities and they're secondary education organizations. And it took a while to pull this community together, and along the way we made mistakes, and we also as an organization had to evolve. You know, organizations, philanthropists, sometimes foundations think, you know, we're great, we know many things, we know the answers, and we think we're doing a good job until reality hits. And so one of the biggest lessons we learned in this process when we brought organizations together was to establish a common learning platform, a set of metrics, a learning agenda, and areas where we wanted to fill knowledge. What came through in one of our evaluations where we actually invited feedback, and feedback through a third party, so that people didn't have to feel intimidated telling us where we were doing well, but where we were not doing as well. One of the key things which came back to us was that our whole learning process needed to be much more centered on the collective, not just what the foundation needed to learn. And at first, you know, we were a bit stunned because we thought we were doing things right, but then we thought, you know, this is the feedback, we need to do something with this feedback. And so, again, with all of the partners, reassembled and reorganized how it is we are learning together. So we have partners, which are either universities or secondary education partners, that lead different working groups on gender, on transitions from school to work, on recruitment, on onboarding, on mentoring. We have young people, most importantly scholars, engaged in different councils and working groups with us. But it's a process. But what I want to just, if I had to distill it down to certain key takeaways, I think there are some of the things which you quoted in that talk, but I think it's a remarkable reminder that as funders, we do have a very unique role, number one, to set the tone and to take the power dynamic out of any collaboration. We already have power because we have resources. So in order to get closer, when I say the truth, that it's the closer to the core and to really understand how it is we're working, how are we actually making a difference, we need to do our best to remove that. And we can do that in some very practical ways. One, I think, is language. We don't use the word grantee in our foundation. We just use the word partner. And a partner could be an organization that's implementing, could be co-funding, could be advising, could be giving critical feedback. That's number one. It clearly is all about listening, and listening with real intent. It is about creating space for other voices to come in and give feedback. Sometimes it's our partners, sometimes it's young people, sometimes it's people in the community who are impacted in a different way by what we're doing. But language, inclusion, providing opportunities for voices to come forward is critical. And I think the most important thing of all is when we stumble, to accept that we have stumbled and to acknowledge it and to actually be thankful and to thank people for pointing out, because it is a human endeavor. So there needs to be a lot of humility, which I don't think is sufficient within the foundation community. So that's my few cents to it.
Great, thank you. I think the key takeaway for me is the importance of feedback, making mistakes, learning from those mistakes, and taking the power dynamics out of collaboration. Very good points. Ms. Kenyatta, I'll turn to you. The Kenyatta Trust focuses on students who've come from disadvantaged family backgrounds and transforms the lives of underprivileged communities in Kenya through a combination of education, mentorship, counseling, community service, and empowerment. Could you share some ways that strategic partnerships has not only enhanced your organization's programs and services, but also help your organization improve its efficacy, its impact, and sustainability?
Yeah. Like I said, we work with a number of organizations within Kenya who are already in that space. Some of them, there's no actual point in reinventing the wheel in most cases. Some of our partners, like for example, our patron is His Excellency the President, Uhuru Kenyatta, and we started off small in the constituency where he was a member of parliament. So when he went on to become president, we were like, okay, now it must sort of take a more national face. In order for us to be able to even do due diligence on the students to ensure that those who apply are actually needy, we partnered with an organization that deals with a lot of social workers who are on the ground for their program. That one actually mainly deals with jiggers. But again, by the time you're getting jiggers, you're also quite economically disadvantaged. So if they don't know who our families are, then really they're not, they should not be part of the program. We also had, again, with our selection criteria, another major school with similar criteria as well, countrywide. And again, they enabled us to be able to piggyback on their selection process to enable us to do that. We also partner with local business that provides our students with opportunities for internships and community service. They enable us where they're able to do the community service, because each student must do at least 200 hours of community service a year when they're out of school. They have enabled us to be able to roll out, to be able to scale, to be able to take on a few more children. And I think if it was just ourselves, that would not have worked. We would not have been able to have the impact that we actually do have, that is on the ground. We use, again, their social workers to look out for our ladies in the village as well. Because if you assume that each student comes in with a guardian, each guardian will come with, let's say, about 20 people who are around them. So that work of ensuring that the work that we start on the ground actually carries forth, is impactful, exactly what is going on. So we have those people who we can collaborate with. Have I answered your question?
Yes. So don't reinvent the wheel, and piggybacking off of existing platforms and infrastructure to scale.
And I think there's also, it's important as well to be very clear what it is you want from one another.
Right.
What exactly you expect from your relationship. What does that engagement look like? What are the financial and human resources that each person will bring to the table? I guess even as Rita is saying, you do end up finding yourself in a bit of you could find awkward position at times if expectations are not made clear.
And does that discussion happen before the partnership begins, or is that something you figure out along the way?
I think what we have seen is that we need to have that conversation up front. Okay. At the beginning.
Great lessons,
Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Mubaiwa, your organization has a lifelong development program that includes leadership training and mentorship through internships, community involvement, and a lifelong engagement through active alumni network, which I found really interesting. How have you used strategic collaborations and partnerships to scale up the work of the foundation, or more specifically, the programs like the ones that I just mentioned?
Rita says that it's very important to listen. So in our organization, one of the things that we have come to become is that we've got a jingle, and our jingle says, we eat what they eat, we sleep where they sleep, we listen to their stories, and we co-create solutions. That came about because, in our 21-year history, at the beginning, it was a response to, our patrons, it's Mr. and Mrs. Masiwa, and they run the largest mobile business in Zimbabwe, which has also expanded into mobile money, also expanded into fiber connectivity. So that's the base where we have built the work that we do. So 21 years ago when the foundation started, it was a response to the scourge of HIV/AIDS. So a lot of people were left orphaned, and they stepped in to start assisting those students. And the business actually came after they had already started the foundation. But then you can imagine that at that time, you could actually identify the need, and then you just go and say, this is what you need, and then you give the scholarship, and then you pay the school fees. But as the time has progressed, in a country where Zimbabwe has been going through the last 37 years have not been the greatest 37 years for Zimbabwe. And in a space like that, innovation becomes very, very important. So our involvement in some of the things that you have mentioned, especially if I look at the provision of quality education, which is one of the things that we do, it was as a result of looking at reports from UNESCO, UNICEF, all these organizations, showing you that the quality of education in sub-Saharan Africa was deteriorating. And then in addition to that, we went through a period when a lot of educators left the country, so the number of students per educator started ballooning. So that caused us to innovate. So we went on and spoke to the government in a very collaborative way, and fortunately, they agreed to our proposal, which was to write the whole content of the whole curriculum from grade 1 all the way to A-level and make it available online for free. And that free part is because of our relationship with a mobile business. So today, as we speak, we've got a product in Zimbabwe we call Ruzivo. That's the product we designed, and it's an e-learning platform, and any Zimbabwean who's got a smartphone or any access through the Econet business, they can access the platform and have education for free. So there's a lot of leveraging on technology that we have done. And in addition to that, because the way we also prefer to operate, we have, in Zimbabwe's got 10 provinces. So in each and every one of the provinces, we have an office, which allows us to do what we claim we are, that we eat what they eat, because the team is out there in the community. We sleep where they sleep, we are in the community, and we listen to their stories, we're in the community. So that has allowed us to do that. So you can imagine that, with the state of the economy of the country, connectivity is a challenge. So what have we done? We've listened to to what the community say, that look, great for you to make Ruzivo available online, but what about rural schools? There's no electricity, there's no there's no internet access. How are you going to help us out to get the same benefits? So we've actually designed an offline platform, and we've gone to the rural areas and we've made the offline platform available. And what we've then done is that because of that, the mentorship has also now become easier. We have designed a mentorship app where we actually match a mentee and a mentor through that application. With our back office, we're able then to monitor the mentorship that is taking place. We have developed content for mentorship, which we have also placed on this platform, and the students and the educators have got access to that. But what is critical in the journey we've walked to date is that you really have got to be very strategic in terms of who do you actually partner with in what you do. So besides our partnership with with Econet that is providing us with the platforms, we have also been very strategic in terms of what do we do with the government? Who do we speak to in the government? At what level do we actually go to the government? And I'll just give you a lesson that we learned in the process. We noticed that, our educators were not ICT, equipped. So we went and partnered with a university, and we wrote out a brilliant, basic ICT program for educators. We've got a memorandum of understanding with the government, so we felt that, we could just go and do stuff. So we went and we trained 11,400 teachers on this ICT training program with our own money, without asking the government for anything. And then we went to the government with this, brochure with all the results to show them how great we had assisted them in doing this. And that's the day they set us down and said, you don't do your own stuff without us. So we've also learned that, it's very important to make sure that you respect these systems in place, and then you work within the system to get the best out of it. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. The power of listening and really getting insights into how the people you're trying to serve and impact, how they live, what their problems are, what their challenges are, so that you can work with them collaboratively to help solve those challenges. Earlier, the ambassador mentioned civil society, which plays a crucial role in responding to the many challenges that we see on the continent. And I'm going to send this back to Rita. Civil society usually serve as first responders in a humanitarian crisis, for example, and they're closest to the problems that we're trying to serve. How can philanthropy partner with civil society in leveraging their proximity to the challenges, to the issues, to deliver scalable impact?
I think there are a number of ways. First and foremost, we also need to look at a couple of things. And when we talk about civil society, the example you gave in terms of first responders, we need to think about the challenges that we're trying to solve, whether it's an ecological challenge in terms of climate change, education, whether it's the quality or the access or the cost, to think about it very, very holistically. Many civil society organizations, including the ones I'm sure all of us work with, have a deeper level of insight into communities, which sometimes is very, very difficult for organizations which are bringing funding to wanting to actually access. And I think, so there are a few things which come to mind. Number one, it again goes back to, you're going to hear this theme over and over again, listening. And actually asking for help in terms of really trying to discern and to frame the challenges many different populations face, and particularly what's unique. We have a tendency, I know, at many foundations to want to look at mass scalable solutions. And sometimes that's fantastic. That's the nirvana state for what we all are trying to do to get to scale. But at the end of the day, communities are unique, and they have their own way of interpreting and understanding and actually conveying what they actually see as the problem. And the barrier we see, which may seem so obvious, the cost, the quality, this, may not actually be the barrier that they are grappling with. And getting to that kind of insight requires leveraging civil society organizations. So I think listening is number one. To the degree that we can enable some cross-fertilization among civil society organizations, I think foundations are well placed to do that, to enable critical learning. And then leverage. Many foundations, if we were to take the first responder, disaster, humanitarian crisis aspect as an example, many foundations are really good at supporting those efforts. But there are other foundations, perhaps like ourselves, who are maybe further downstream on rehabilitation, rebuilding. We need to think about the needs of communities in a much more holistic way. There's an immediate life-death urgency for some, in terms of some response. But further along the way, there's rehabilitation, restoration, growth, and rebuilding. And to the degree that we can come and say, we need to look at this as I don't know what the right term is, a value chain, a life cycle, or a process, but then to really think about who can play what role at different points in the continuum. And that, again, we tap civil society.
Great, thank you. And Ms. Kenyatta, in your work, do you feel there's a disconnect between the work that local groups and local civil society groups are doing and their international sort of funders. And I'll give an example of the Ebola crisis in Liberia, for example. My organization did some Ebola response work, and we found that the only time that Ebola actually started to subside and we started to see some real impact was when local groups, community organizations, community people themselves were taking ownership of the problem and going out and doing awareness work. Whereas you had billions of dollars pouring into the country, but they were being directed towards the big international organizations, and the local groups are usually sort of neglected and pushed to the side. Do you find that in your work, and do you think there's a disconnect? Because we talk about collaboration, but is there collaboration happening at sort of that high level of funding and the local level?
Disconnect. Yes, there is. First of all, even with the language, civil society in Kenya maybe is, when you talk about civil society, you immediately think of political activism. I think that's what they're known for. But that said, there's a lot of NGOs is what I think we call them.
NGOs
it's the same thing,
and
NGOs,
community-based
yes,
groups.
Correct. Yeah, who do a lot of good work on the ground. If you leave out the lady in the village, it will be very difficult for you to be able to achieve anything, because at the end of the day, they are the ones who know the problem that they are facing. You can come and try and say, well, here you go, that will sort out your issue. No. So even when we set them up as groups, we sit down with them and they tell us what they feel their need is and how they feel we can assist them to grow. And what has that done? That has ended up with a group of women who really, didn't even know where the next meal was coming from, where they were going to get the next child to school. They now are able to look after their parents, their children, and other members of their community. There is dignity that is restored. It's critical for any intervention to be effective. It has to talk to the person that is being targeted. Otherwise, it's just, I think, a little bit ineffective, to be honest. Yeah.
Dr. Mubaiwa, do you want to maybe share your thoughts on sort of this disconnect between funders at the top level and local groups at sort of that village woman level?
Yeah, so let me just maybe hone in on, a situation that we had to deal with as Ally Foundation. There's an area in Zimbabwe which, the poverty level is pretty bad, and we were giving out a lot of scholarships in that area, but you then find that once a student is around 15, 16 years old, it then became more attractive for them to cross the border and get into South Africa because of better opportunities, but it was more of they get into South Africa, they start working, and then they drop out of completing school. So in listening to that from that community, we then looked at who is the best in addressing that challenge. And we found that World Vision, who were working in Zimbabwe, had a better model to deal with that challenge than anybody else. But World Vision had never actually worked with a local foundation So we had to then co-create a product specific for that particular community and work with World Vision to do that. So we then started giving the funds we were going to spend in that particular area. We then started channeling them through World Vision so that World Vision can actually do what they know how to do best for that community. And the completion rate of the students in that area is actually increased because of working with somebody who knows what to do. So there's a disconnect in if it's not strategic collaboration, because everybody has got their own agenda. Everybody thinks they know what the problem is, but if you actually sit down and work around how best to do it together, and then you bring in the community and understand the community's needs, then you can design a product that actually works for that particular community.
Thank you. Okay, very interesting takeaways. Rita, back to you. On the topic of evaluation and measuring impact, how important is it to develop a shared measurement system in assessing the success of the relationships within these strategic partnerships? And how do you develop this measurement system?
It's essential. And just one aside, I want to just say how much I agree with your comments. I think you were very diplomatic. I think they're exceptionally diplomatic. I think there's a huge disconnect. And a lot of that disconnect, unfortunately, some of it is incented by the global funders, how we interact with large organizations. It's a default to provide a grant or a large gift of money or resource to an international organization, which is also well-meaning, which then has to aggregate or distribute implementation through a range of organizations, civil society organizations. And I think as funders or foundations, certainly, there are many things we can do to close that gap, and that's one of the things which we try very hard to do, is compress time and distance between us and really understanding what goes back. And it ties back to evaluation. So I think that it is absolutely essential to have to co-create what it is we want to learn together. People use the words theory of change, this, that, the other thing, but essentially it's a common learning agenda. Where are the gaps? What does the literature tell us? What does experience tell us? And where are the holes that we need to fill? And agree to that. Agree to a set of things we want to measure, which we think is important. Some of it can be captured qualitatively, some of it can be captured quantitatively. Within our evaluation and learning policy at the foundation, there are 3 tenets, but one of the most important tenets is about really listening and listening to clients. So it goes back to what you said a moment ago, getting back to that woman, to that child, and really understanding it. But the third part, but the component of just listening is also returning data to communities. So it is not extractive. Oftentimes, I'm sure many communities have been surveyed to death, interviewed to death, the data collected to death, but they never ever hear whatever became of that information. We work with an astounding, actually incredible organization which has taught us a lot, which works with young girls in rural areas, CAMFED. And I went to one of their programs just to see a return of data to the community, where they had collected data at the beginning of the program, or the project, done a baseline, but they came back and visualized the data for communities so that communities could actually discuss. This is what the picture looks like. Is there another picture you'd like to see? And what would you like that picture to look like? And then let's design the program to work towards that new picture of different set of results for the community. So I think listening, collecting information, having a common set of an understanding of the problem we're trying to solve, common set of things we want to learn, what we will measure, gathering data, but sharing that data beyond just ourselves and the funders.
Sharing it with those you're serving as well.
Who brought us the data.
Great, thank you. Ms. Kenyatta, this is a simple question. How do you identify the right partners, and what makes a good partnership?
Like I said, it's being clear on what it is you are trying to achieve. Do your goals match? What population are you targeting? So if you can find people who you can then walk with, it's just being clear on your intention. What is the intention? And then you look and see, sometimes they don't work, but sometimes they do. And again, just being very clear. This is what I expect out of this relationship. When it goes wrong, it's sometimes a bit like a marriage, it can, sometimes you just have to sit and say, either is it working, is it not working? What can we do to improve this? It's talking, it's being open, and making your expectations very clear, I believe.
Dr. Mubaiwa, same question to you.
For us, it's looking at our values. So Hala Foundation, it's a faith-based organization. So that's our, where we launch from. And, we then make sure that with the communities that we would like to get into, is that which we are putting together, going to actually serve the community, and the values that we subscribe to going to be, upheld. For example, we've got a relationship with Yale University, and that relationship is around. It fits very well in the strategy that Hala Foundation has. So I said earlier on that we want to raise African leaders through education. So we teamed up with Yale, and it took us almost a year, just making sure that we put the best agreement in place. And to also include what Rita said, we set the baselines together, so that it was not just going to be a relationship that doesn't have measurables, that doesn't, show what has been the impact of what has been done. That relationship has exposed, to date, we've exposed 600 Pan-African bright minds to, the Yale program. We run that program here in Kigali, in Accra, and in Harare. And the next program is actually taking place at the end of July. So that relationship is because the values matched. And the evaluations we've done since the program started in 2016 got us this year to then agree on extending the relationship for another 5 years, based on the fact that what we agreed would do is being done, and the values are still being retained. We've got a relationship also with the End Fund, where we assist with mass drug administration, and that relationship also was built around what are our values, what are your values, who are we serving, how are we going to serve, and can we have regular updates on what we agreed on, so that nobody then falls out of the values, nobody falls out of what was planned to be done.
Also, you mentioned that your organization is opening up offices in Kenya. Can you talk a little bit about what cross-border collaboration looks like? Is it very different from the type of partnerships that you establish in the country that you've been working for years and decades? Or do you use those same lessons and examples when you're expanding to another country? What does that look like?
So our expansion into Kenya is interesting. Like I mentioned earlier on, that our patrons, the Masiwas, so one of their businesses where they've got a shareholding in is Liquid Telecoms, which has got quite a big base now in Kenya. And so we took the model as we were working on it in Zimbabwe, and then brought it into the Kenya space. So leveraging on the telecoms business, so that's the first piece. But then at the same time, we could not just come with a commercial entity and try and provide, non-profit work. So what we did was, last year, we invited like-minded organizations in Kenya for a breakfast meeting. So we came to Nairobi, and then we met with Kenyatta Foundation was represented, Equity Foundation was represented, so quite a number of foundations were there. And then we learned from them on how is it done in Kenya. And then from there, we then looked at who does it the way we do it, and then we found a partner that is now helping us. In fact, we found 2 partners that are helping us to walk in that space. So we're working with them to help us to establish the scholarship programs, the access programs, the mentorship programs within that space.
So really talking to others in that local context so that you can understand best practices. Great. So we're going to wrap up, but I just wanted to give you all some last words on how you would describe strategic partnerships for social impact in just a few sentences, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Group of people, group of leaders, group of organizations interested in solving a particular problem, interested in seeing a certain set of outcomes, committing to a set of strategies, willing to learn, and flexible enough to shift course based on what we learn, and committed to scaling that learning. That's what I call collaboration.
Great. Dr. Mubaiwa, what is collaboration and strategic partnership to you?
So for us, the first thing that we had to do was to define our strategy. So we worked on our vision, we worked on our strategy, and we worked on our key pillars, which is quality of education, lifelong development, and access. Because of that, when we then look at who to collaborate with, it's targeted. So there are some organizations that have tried to work with us, but when we look at ourselves and our skills and what we want to achieve, we've been able to say, no, we cannot. So I think it's also important to make sure that it's not just any collaboration, but it's actually strategic collaboration that brings the benefit that you're looking at.
The right fit. Ms. Kenyatta?
I would say it's a coming together of individuals, organizations with a common objective for a common social good, where you can actually understand and maximize on that relationship by utilizing the strengths that each person has.
Great. Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Can we give a round of applause to our panelists, please? And we're making good timing. So we'll open it up for questions. And if you can be brief, and if you don't mind directing it at a specific panelist, that way it's targeted. And yeah, it's open for questions. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, good morning. My name is Sando Jambo. I work with Safaricom in Kenya. So I guess probably my question would go to Rita. Shouldn't corporate foundations be working themselves out of a job? So I've listened to all of you talk about social impact, and it seems to be a perspective that there'd be an ongoing relationship. I'm just wondering about what that means to you. And then secondly, how would you tie up your work with the Sustainable Development Goals, that being a key driver of development going forward? So I guess to Rita, but to anyone else on the panel as well.
So I think the second question first, I think definitely for us with our new strategy, it's aligning against the Sustainable Development Goals in terms of aggregating what we look around young people and employment, in terms of transition to work, what that means in terms of greater levels of security for families, where maybe talk about poverty alleviation, the focus around young people, especially young women, as a whole piece around gender. So there is an aggregation, which is too much to get into here, but there's an alignment. And, sorry?
Because the form's about social impact, I guess my question would be, ultimately, wouldn't the SDGs be the perfect framework for social impact?
Would the SDGs be a perfect framework?
So I guess I'm just challenging the discussion that we've had as panelists around what the ultimate social impact framework would be. I wouldn't say that it's too much to get into in this panel. I think it would be the perfect place to actually land the panel.
I must have misunderstood. I thought you asked how we were aligning to the SDGs.
No, it's just based on your comment that you said you thought it would be too much to get into in this
okay.
panel. So I
So
was thinking it would be the ultimate thing to get into.
Yeah. So with regards to the SDGs, I think it's on your perspective. I think that is whether you think it's the perfect framework or not. It is clearly what the international community has identified. And I think it's up to different organizations, depending on their area of work, to identify either specific goals within the SDGs, which their work is trained against. So whether it's around women, whether it's around financial inclusion, employment, but it is an anchor and it's almost a common denominator of how people are having conversations. So I think to that degree, it's very helpful and it's about alignment. With regards to corporate foundations, I wouldn't just restrict it to corporate foundations. We are not a corporate foundation, so I think any funder, I think the ultimate goal is to work yourself out of a business. I think foundations have one role to play, but I think governments, and I think in the end the private sector, have a role to play when you talk about sustainable impact. Many foundations have a timeline when their assets are to be wound down. Certainly in the United States, many foundations look at a 20-year point, a 50-year point, when all the assets are to be dispersed. So whether or not the work is done or not, I mean, that's another big area of discussion. Ultimately, you would hope that we wouldn't need philanthropy. But that's another question, not just existential and philosophical, but really about what kind of goals what type of outcomes or endpoints do we actually achieve.
Dr. Mumbaiwa, maybe you can expand on that. Do local foundations have that same sort of perspective of working themselves out of business? Is there a timeline or a time frame to your work?
To be honest, if I look at our country, Zimbabwe, that conversation hasn't started yet because the challenges that we have still requires the role that we play. I mean, every year, our foundation, we sustaining school fees for 20,000 students. And, we are actually in the process of working on building our endowment because we have not yet, started thinking about winding down at all. Yeah.
You're just getting started, it seems.
Thank you so much for this interesting discussion. My name is Desta Lako, and I am Head of Partnerships for Amref Health Africa in Kenya at the headquarters. And we're an international NGO. So we work with foundations and we partner with multi-sectoral partners. The question that I have for you kind of is aligned to what Sanda asked earlier. We are all looking at the SDGs and these really massive sort of global goals that we're working towards. In Africa, for example, there's healthcare worker shortage, 1.5 million healthcare workers that we need. There's a shortage of, or there's a need for governance, leadership, management programs so that our leaders, whether it's in the health sector or education or any other sector, are ready, prepared, and able to actually deliver on what you're giving them. You're giving them a chance. So my question is, have you, in any of your three organizations, embedded some sort of indicators to say, these are the SDGs, if you're using that platform, in fact, to measure in your corporate strategies? That's number one, and I guess that applies to all. And then on the piece of looking at, and this is to Dr. Kennedy, you said you came to Kenya to look at how do you develop partnerships or identify strategic partners to open up your solution for education in Kenya. And you asked corporates and foundations to join you. And I think that one of the things, I've worked on the foundation side as the director of a foundation, and I work on the partnership side for NGO. So one of the things that I've recognized is that as foundations, sometimes we talk to one another. And we really need to also drill down and look at the CSOs and the local organizations who can actually provide some good feedback to you that will direct you on how you should look at doing your business there. And then to Ms. Kenyatta, there are so many organizations in Kenya, for example. Amref has an alternative rite of passage program. In the last 5 years, we've graduated 15,000 girls. And you look at these girls, and even if you prevent FGM and keep them in school, the issue is they don't have funding to continue their school. So I think you actually are so well placed to contribute to so many girls' education in Kenya. So I beseech you to actually look at some of these girls in some of these counties where FGM is 90%, in Samburu, Kajiado, etc. So I would just ask you to reflect on that.
Thank you.
Well, to respond to your last question, yes, we are working within those communities as well, even within some of the shelters, to try and just make some impact felt there as well. So we are. And each community has, like we said, different needs, completely different needs on the ground, so we do that as well. Thank you.
And Dr. Kennedy, were there conversations with civil society groups and community-based groups, or just foundations and corporations?
Okay, so maybe before I go to that part of her questions, can I go to the one around, are we being specific in how we are giving out, scholarships, and are we looking at specific skills that we want to be brought forth? Okay, so Hala Foundation, we've got two types of scholarships. One is called Capenham Scholarship, which is a needs-based scholarship that caters mostly for orphaned and vulnerable, and we don't bring in merit in that, but as the students progress, we then start seeing how we can channel, and then we channel as best as we can. We also got another scholarship that is called the Joshua Coma Scholarship. So with the Joshua Coma Scholarship, we are actually STEM focused. So it's a STEM focused scholarship, and every year we give opportunity to 100 students throughout the country. And if you came to Zimbabwe and you would look for health care in a hospital, the doctor who's likely to treat you is a Hala Foundation doctor. So we've been very specific in some of those areas. Zimbabwe at some point, 2008 to about 2010, the country almost closed down the health sciences program at our main university. So we stepped in and made sure that we maintain those skills. So we're doing a lot of that. In addition, the students that are coming through the needs-based scholarship, we've tried to do the best we can to channel them into agriculture, into technical skills and all that. So with the 250,000 plus Zimbabweans we've assisted, it's almost 100% correct that you bump into one of our students in most of, be it government, be it nursing, be it teaching. We've been that specific, and we track. So we can actually give you a list and say, how many teachers have we trained? How many teachers are in training colleges at the moment? How many doctors have we trained? How many engineers have we trained? We've got all of that. We've been that specific. We started doing it before it even was broken down into Sdgs and all that. I think the patrons had the vision quite a while ago that this is the way to go. So we've done that. And then on the question around learning from other foundations on our way on our entry into Kenya, it's a bit unique in the sense that the funds that we're going to be working with in Kenya are actually coming from our Kenyan business. So we actually worked with the business and asked the business, what sort of skills do you foresee in the future, and what courses should we actually be looking at, because we're entering at a tertiary level, we're not going into secondary or primary. So we're actually being very targeted at a tertiary level to say these are the students that can actually create a pool of skills for the business that is funding the work that we're doing. That's how so that's why we ended up looking for somebody who could help us to look for what they were looking for.
Great, thank you. We'll take 2 questions in the front here, and then we'll go back to that side.
Thank you. I'm Patrick Worms. I am a science policy advisor for the World Agroforestry Center. We are a Nairobi-based research organization, and as I was listening to the panelists, they were rightly focusing on education, on creating leadership, but at no stage did I hear you mention the word research or development or innovation. And Africa has a massive deficit in these issues, and we know, for example, from our field, which is agricultural development, that the solutions that have been developed for temperate zones and that are being brought to Africa rarely work if they are tweaked. What you need is original African research, original African solutions based on original African insights and informed by global science, of course. The question is the following. Do your foundations and does the philanthropic community more generally understand, sorry, that's a patronizing question, I mean, realize or have programs to include and to further the development of African science, since African science, unlike the science of rich countries, cannot depend, for example, on endowments built up over decades, or in some cases, centuries. Thank you.
Thank you. Your question, please. We'll take two at a time. Yeah.
Okay. Hi. My name is Liz Fanning. I'm the founder of Core Africa, which is a private effort to create an African Peace Corps program. And I'm curious if you've heard of USAID's new effort to promote transitioning away from dependence on outside aid. And they're trying to come up with metrics of self-sufficiency, they're calling it. And I'm wondering if you see local foundations, African foundations, if you believe that they should include support from African foundations as a positive metric, and if you think they should, and if they've talked to you about working on this, and how you feel about it, if you think it's important to Africans' development.
I'll answer the second question. I think right at the beginning, we were told APF is African philanthropy for Africans. It is critical that people, our own people, start to make impact within the continent, the communities that we come from. Like you say, with USAID and a lot of those other major organizations, yes, our economies are growing. And as we get to that middle income, the funds are being reduced, that are being given for different development agendas. It is critical. It is critical that Africans really do rise to the challenge. And it's something that with organizations like APF, we are able to bring a different framework to a long, long African tradition of giving, because it's not something that has started now. It's nothing new within the African context. But if we're able to actually just put some structure around it, which I think is what APF is trying to do, yeah, I think we are actually addressing some of those issues. That is the new frontier. It's the new horizon. That is the future. Yeah.
So I'll answer the second question. Maybe because of time, we did not go granular, but our foundation, if I speak for our foundation, Zimbabwe's got about 14 universities, and we fund almost about 10 of them. We put money into research in 10 of the universities in Zimbabwe. We have just, we're in the process of launching a PhD program. That PhD program, it is being designed to make sure that as a country we build the capacity of thought leaders that can help in making sure that there's research in the country and there are solutions that are actually coming out of the country. In addition, I spoke about the Ruzivo education platform. We did not go to the US or to UK to buy that. It was actually developed in-house. and it has been developed to address the education system from a Zimbabwean way, and not from, we're not trying to address global challenges, we're actually trying to address Zimbabwean issues. So it's designed such that the Minister of Education in my country can sit in his office and set an exam for one district in Zimbabwe and get those kids to do that and be able to know that this is the district in my country that is actually, so that's how, we've actually been solution focused. In addition, we also set up a center that we call Muzinda. At Muzinda, we train coding. And it's coding for Zimbabwean. We're training coders not to export them, but we're training coders to actually take care of Zimbabwean solutions based on what they can do with that. So we're being that deliberate to make sure that, we get solutions for Zimbabwe. In addition to that, we've also realized that some skills that Zimbabwe needs, they've got to come from international universities. So we've got some of our students in Ivy League universities. We've got some in Oxford, we've got some in the US and all that. And we are actually working on them to make sure that they bring back solutions to the continent. We even have got students studying robotics, but we're trying to get them to study robotics to the benefit of the continent. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Rita, I know you want to touch on.
The answer is yes, lots of research, so rest assured. And a lot of research actually coming from the continent, whether it's from the African Institute of Mathematical Sciences, from a consortia of African universities known as RU Forum, which work on agriculture and sustainable development, and the list goes on. So there's a great need, there's a huge gap when you look at the disproportionate amount of money being spent on research from institutions in North America or in Europe versus those in Africa, and there's a huge gap to catch up.
Okay, we still have lots of questions. So we'll take two on this side. So the gentleman in the front and then the lady in the middle.
My name is Mohammed Osman from the Elton John AIDS Foundation office in London and New York, but mostly in London. So do not exclude us. We are not African-based foundation, but we are run by Africans and we work in Africa. So that helps. My question to you guys is a bit broader than that. Partnership has cost. Partnership has cost on the funders, cost on the implementers. Who picks up this bill? Because often people say, you partner. It costs a lot of money to partner. It's not on your budgets. Who pays for it?
Yeah, we'll take two at a time.
Thank you. My name is Angela. I'm from the Financing Alliance for Health, and what we do is we partner with developing country governments to deploy at-scale health systems hinged on domestic financing, but crowding in social impact investors, private sector, and philanthropic work. To emphasize, but not to belabor the point, but also to challenge also the folks who are organizing this forum, the role of government in these kinds of conversation. And recognizing that government is a strategic partner for philanthropy and social impact. Let's recognize that government is a scaler, okay, can take things to scale because government is already at scale, is a convener, is a coordinator, is a sustainer, more and less. It can be a co-funder. Another mentality change that we need to move from. Governments are stepping up. Governments are mobilizing domestic financing for a large number of initiatives. And how are you as people within philanthropy space partnering with governments in that sense? And also government as a human resource mobilizer. So even if not giving actual funds, being able to bring other resources to the table that philanthropy needs to leverage on. And obviously the overall umbrella is the role of government in terms of regulation and sustaining. I'm coming to, I see you picking your microphone, I'm moving on. My question and challenge to the team is the element of risk. Right? Especially now that we are in this, the Africa Philanthropy Forum and the context we work in, how do you think about risk in terms of how you give, where you give, who you give it to? And I think looking at, given the history of philanthropy and now that we are now taking up this space, Are we just going to continue what has been happening, or we'll recognize that there are people who have systematically been left out in philanthropy, and we have an opportunity to change that narrative? Thank you.
Thank you. So partnership costs, who pays for that, and how do you think about risk?
So very quickly on who pays, I think if you're working collaboratively with a number of foundations to address a particular problem, there are all kinds of cost-sharing models. If you're working with civil society organizations, I think it's clear the foundation needs to actually pick up the tab. There's no question about that. In terms of the actual cash or funding, many times civil society organizations or NGOs or other organizations put in kind because it draws on a strength. I think it's very, very important that people enter a collaboration as partners. And each of us bring what it is we can bring to do that. And it's usually more than money, and it's more than in kind. Sometimes it's the brand that we put beside it, and the awareness and the good housekeeping seal we give to an initiative. In terms of risks, look, this is a risky business, period. And there are, in philanthropy, I think there are different ways of segmenting risk. We look at partner risk in terms of who we work with, et cetera. There's an issue around what we would call just operational risk and the ability to execute, depending on the country, the kind of technology we might be using, et cetera. And then there's program risk. And by that, I mean, is this particular idea worthy of being tested? And are we prepared to test it, whether or not it works or doesn't? And what we can learn from it. That's a very high-level way of segmenting risk, and then you can sub-segment from there on. But I think as philanthropists, we have to take on risk to be bold.
In terms of who takes care of the costs from a partnership standpoint, the way we work is we try and get into situations where 80% of the money has got to go into the lack of a better term, the beneficiary. So that's how we try and work. And so far, we've never been able to try and ask the other partner to bring in any money. We prefer not to be controlled by the funds coming from the other partner. So we try as much as we can to be the ones that that are bringing in the money. And then in terms of risk, our foundation, our patrons are entrepreneurs. So we live in the risk space, and we love the risk space. And I think some of the things that we've done in Zimbabwe, if we had been risk averse, I don't think we would have ever been able to do anything. And in some cases, we've done stuff, and then because of regulations, we've had to go and ask for forgiveness. But I think the role of, in my view, philanthropy is taking us that space where you've got for you to get the impact you're looking for. There's got to be a risk element that you're willing to take. When we developed the online platform, we had no idea that it would take off, and Zimbabwe's got at any one time 3.8 students going to school, and 3.8 million go to school every year. Right now, 1.6 million of those students are now on our platform, and 600,000 use it every month. And the ministry is now going to launch it as an official platform for the nation. So if we had not taken some of those risks, I don't think it would have happened.
Great, thank you. We'll take 2 questions on this side, and then I think that's about it. Yeah, okay. Lady in the front and the gentleman in the back.
My name is Gertrude. I have a very simple question, and perhaps this is more...
Speak up.
I have a very simple question, and perhaps this is more post the scholarships and post the opportunities that you offer to Africa. Statistically, there are issues with education and there are issues with employment. But from what you've spoken about, there's lots of scholarships that we're giving, there's lots of education that we're brain drain. But are there partnerships, are there plans, are there things that you're actually looking into that are allowing for you to educate all these many African students and bring them back, but more importantly, keep them in Africa? Because I find that after doing my master's, when I came back home, I couldn't find a job, even though I was bright and able. So after all that process, are there some implementation processes and plans to keep us here? Because now we look out instead of keep bringing our brain here.
Thank you. Last question in the back.
Hi, my name is Maoli Dake from Ghana, and a Tutu fellow. My boss is here. And so there's been some questions about the disconnect between the larger, higher-level funders and the communities that they support. And sometimes, just to share a quick example of a solution that we employed some time ago. I worked as a fund manager for Ties Foundation to set up a fund, Newfield Foundations, during George Bush era. And these were philanthropies that were interested in supporting rural women in the Mano River Union and the Casamance. They had never been to Africa. This was George Bush time. There was anti-money laundering, anti-terrorism laws. So they were really scared about where that money will end up. So when I was hired, I was like, okay, we have to find a way to make it work. So what we did was to find in each country, the women's group didn't have the capacity or the legal status to meet some of the standards that are required to be able to get the funding. So what we did was to find in each country to have one organization, maybe a national organization that doesn't necessarily fit into the criteria that we're looking for. But we use them as a middle person, help them to hire an accountant, help them to hire everything that the smaller organizations don't have. But it required money. And I had to convince the board to invest in that, and it worked. And the money got to the small groups that need. So the point I'm making is that as funders, it's important for you to also invest in finding solutions. Don't be forced to look at the structures available. Invest in creating some of them. And just last quickly, I'm not in the philanthropy sector. I'm in civil society. And it's challenging where our funders are reluctant to look at issues that are really transformational. So when you are dealing with the fashionable issues, you get a lot of support. But where you need funders to take the risk and believe in a big idea and things that will actually, like I'm in leadership sector, and it's just difficult. Everybody will tell you leadership is not a priority. Meanwhile, when we go to all these forums over the past weekend, everybody is talking about how awful our leadership is and what a big challenge is, but nobody's investing in leadership. So I want to throw that challenge out there, that take that risk and look at the transformational
traditional
issues as well. Thank you
Okay,
very much.
one last one. Can you pass the mic and then we'll wrap up?
Thank you very much, and I'll be very brief. I actually don't have a question. I might have an answer to some of the questions that were raised here.
Even better.
I really want to follow up on the question of measuring social impact and the SDGs. I work for the Social Progress Imperative, and we produce something called the Social Progress Index. And as I said, I'll be very brief. I will be here all afternoon if anyone wants to talk to me about it. But the key distinguishing features of the index are that we focus on measuring social performance directly as a complement to economic measures that we all know nowadays don't really trickle down to creating societal progress. As we also know, SDGs are imperfect, although they are great, and it's fantastic that we have them. We need to have more flexible measures for countries to set and measure their targets, whether they fit exactly in the measuring framework of SDGs or whether they follow the trajectory and the direction of SDGs. That's also what our framework of the Social Progress Index does. And thirdly, it focuses on outcomes, on the real lived experience of people on a daily basis in their lives. The framework has been used by several countries in Latin America to actually measure and track their progress against the SDGs, as well as European Union for doing the same. So very happy to work with any of you if you'd like to, and thank you for giving me the work and for the inspiring discussion.
Thank you. So we will wrap up with the two questions around what are the plans to keep scholars here after they've returned from studies, and funders need to look outside of traditional sexy areas.
So on the second question, looking at sexy areas, I think the answer is yes, we do, and we are. On the question of brain drain, certainly for our programs, that was even before we got going, that was one of the biggest conversations we had with a number of funders who we learned from about what happened to their graduates, their scholars, etc. So, and there was a range of things for make people sign in blood that they will go home to nothing, completely open-ended. And what we learned was the ones which were completely open-ended had the highest rate of return. So that is number one. And that you can't force someone to do something they don't want to do anyway. And so the program is designed, it's predicated by looking at a particular kind of profile of young people, and the good news is here, most young people want to make a difference in their community. So you're just channeling something that's already innate, and you're nurturing it along the way. But you can do some smart things in the program design. One is to make sure young people return home during their education experience. They stay connected, they're doing internships, they're doing service projects, they're building a portfolio of real life practical working experience, which they can then present to an employer. On the tail end, towards the tail end of that whole leadership development process where we're engaging them while they're still captive in school about their purpose, writing a mission statement for themselves, thinking about a life plan, not just a career. And then there's a lot of work which is focused on transitions. Transitions either into higher education if they're going for their master's from their first degree, transitions into the workplace right away. And sometimes that transition may take a little bit of a circuitous route, and that's fine. But if the destination is home or the region, that's also fine. But there's a lot of support and a lot of networks which need to be put in place.
Thank you, Rita.
So on the brain drain question, before coming for this weekend, I actually passed through Nairobi. There's a group, a network called, maybe some of you might not be aware of it, it's called High Achievers Low Income Students. It's a network that we initiated the formation of the network, and then Mastercard has funded them for last year and this year. It's a network that is growing, and their role is, they find these scholarships for students to go and study in international universities. And the one big thing on their agenda for what took place this last meeting was, how do you actually encourage students to come back to the continent after they've qualified? And it's a whole debate that is taking place, and there's a lot of work that network is actually going to be working on to make sure that it's a strategic process. I think the challenge with most African countries is that students have gone to study in international universities, and the governments don't have a strategy. So when the student is finished with their studies, they're the ones that are deciding whether they should go back home or not. And they never get any interaction from their government, So we believe that there's a role that the government has got to play in understanding who is actually going to study in international university. What are they studying? Where can we actually maximize what they have studied to how we want our nation to actually grow? So those are some of the things that the Hali Access Network is actually working around to make sure that it becomes part of the strategies that governments actually work with. And in addition to what Rita said, we give international scholarships. We don't ask for any signature from anybody. But as the leaders of our foundation, it is upon us to make sure that as the student is going through the process, we inject the love of country in the process. Absolutely. So that love of country, love of continent, so that by the time they finish, they find it in their heart to want to be back, rather than to be forced to come back. But that is part of, I think, a bigger picture that needs to be actually clearly defined.
Excellent. Ms. Kenyatta, any last words on?
I don't really think I've got anything to add, because even during some of our camps that we have with the children, same concepts. We instill in them, you really are the future leaders of Kenya. this country is in your hands. So far, we don't have anybody who has gone and not come back, even the ones who have gone to university abroad. Yeah, love of country is top for all of us. Yeah, not only leaders, but servant leaders as well. Thank you.
Great, and we'll end on that note, love of country. Thank you all so much. Please join me in giving a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you. You guys were wonderful.